Hi. On this episode, I'm going to try something a little bit different. If you are a follower of us over on YouTube, you can actually watch me record this episode. So this should be interesting. I've never tried this before. And again, it's not that much different other than the fact I'm just sitting in my office. And you can see, though, if you hit the feed, I'm holding up the actual comic that a lot of this is coming from. This is Preacher's One Man's War, amazing cover by Bisley. So I'll be flipping through that as we go through the episode, showing the people over on YouTube. But let's go ahead and start up the podcast. Of course, what we're going to be doing the podcast on today is Herr Starr, and that's the guy from one of the big baddies from Preacher, and that's of course the comic, Vertigo comic, and the DC, the AMC show that I guess a lot of religious moms are trying to get off the air. I hope not, because it's a great show from a great comic. But I am not caught up with season 2, but I'm looking forward to getting there. So let's go ahead and let's start off with the podcast. And again, I'm going to be, that was my light that just totally fell. So I'm going to put that back up while we're recording, which is funny. That's weird. All right. See, that's how you know it's live television, because things go wrong constantly. So let's hope that doesn't fall again. All right, let's go ahead and let's start up. I already made a mistake. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com. Heroes, Villains, and Sidekicks. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Episode 45, Herr Starr. His first appearance was in Preacher #1 in 1985, created by writer Garth Ennis and the amazing and late great artist Steve Dillon. Now this week on the Heroes, Villains, and Sidekicks, we'll be looking and learning about Herr Starr, soldier for a secret, very secret, organization known as the Grail, who is on a mission to find and recruit Jesse Custer to become the new Messiah. Oh, and he has like the worst luck of pretty much any man in comic. Yes, does he deserve it? He deserves quite a bit of what he gets, but he really gets a whole lot. And we'll look at that, of course, later as we go through the podcast. So today we look at one of my favorite characters in Preacher. And I think I've said that in all the Preacher episodes. So if you haven't listened to those, go back and take a listen. This also is unfortunately our last podcast in the Preacher series. Now, I know there are several more characters that we could talk about, but I think we've covered all the biggies and the ones that really, really matter. And today we'll actually be talking about a few minor characters that work in the Grail with Starr. So that'll be kind of cool. I also want to apologize for not getting an episode out in a couple weeks. We were on a vacation, and when we came back, the jet lag killed me and all sorts of stuff happened. So now we're back on schedule. We'll be back having one out every Monday. So again, we covered a lot of the guys, but that being said, we in this episode we'll also be talking about some people in the Grail that I really like. One of them has one of my favorite storylines, actually. Now, and we'll be, like I said, we'll be talking about him later. So, but let's go ahead. Let's jump into Herr Starr and all the bad luck he has from all these unfortunate choices. Now, I have to say, bad luck, I don't really believe in bad luck. No such thing. Luck, and I'm using air quotes here, and if you're on the web, on YouTube, you're going to see air quotes, is really just a product of the accumulation of choices that you've made. I mean, that's just my opinion. There is no bad luck. There is no good luck. There are only your choices. And Herr Starr makes just terrible choices throughout the entire series. And he gets, I guess, what he deserves. So let's go ahead. Most of the time we have talked about in a lot of the other podcasts the events that took place in Starr's sort of life through the comic. So, like, you know, when we talked about Jesse, when we talked about Cassidy, all those people, we kind of really laid out a lot of who Starr was throughout the Preacher series. But the so the thing I wanted to talk about today in this podcast is his earlier years, before he even knew about Jesse Custer, up to the moment he learned about him. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at today. Not so much who he was and what happened during the Preacher story, because we've talked a lot about that. And we will talk a little bit about it, but we're going to talk about how he got to be who he is. And now like I said, he's one of my favorite characters because he's very much like Jesse. He has a definite and rigid code of beliefs that he sticks to. And those beliefs, they guide what he's going to do. They guide his motivation. But it's on the opposite side of the coin as Jesse's. So let's take a look at actually how he got to have those rigid guidelines. So Herr Starr, now the first name, we don't really know his first name, so I'm going to refer to him as Herr Starr or Starr. Now, he first appeared in issue 13 of Preacher under the storyline The Hunters. And he actually appears in 50 issues. So he's in there quite a bit. Now, Starr was a soldier first. Then he was actually introduced to the Grail on a mission where a guy who was there sort of took notice and then invited him on to join. So we're gonna get into that. Now, like many of the characters in Preacher, Starr got his own one-shot comic in 1988 titled One Man's War. And that's what we're going to be looking at in this episode. And I have to say, of all my specials, this one is probably my favorite for a couple reasons. One, I love the artist. Now, the artist was Peter, I am going to kill this name, Schneeberg? And Garth Ennis, of course, wrote it. So I love Schneeberg's art. I just love it. And the coloring is just perfect for the style of his art. It's very, very complimentary. Now, this book details Starr's life from 1974 through to when Preacher starts in the late 90s. And it's actually cool because it sort of breaks down the timelines, like 1974, 1984. So we really get a timeline here. And here we even learn how Starr lost his eye. Now, if you're not familiar with what he looks like in the comic, again, I haven't got to see him in the show yet, but if you haven't seen him in the comic, of course, you can head over to the site, heroesvillainsandsidekicks.com, and I've got a lot of pages up there from this issue, and you can see what he looks like. But he is bald, very stern-looking man, and his one of his eyes, there are scars that sort of go like an X, almost like a star, over his eyes, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and his eye is totally white. So we actually learn how that happens in this book. Now, again, this is a great special, and it clocks in at about 54 pages, which is pretty neat. All right, so let's get into the special and learn about Herr Starr before the Grail, how he joined them and then rose through their ranks. Then we'll look at his arc through the Preacher series a little bit and see how some of his underlings sort of managed having to deal with this person. Now, the book opens in 1974 with Starr as a member of the West German Reichsmark, and he's an elite member of this anti-terrorism team. And Starr and his team are sent to subdue an armed group that have hijacked a plane full of civilians. Now, they burst in and just start shooting, completely obliterating the hijackers. It's very bloody. Things went well, not for the hijackers, of course, but things went well. But there was one casualty. A little girl was killed in the exchange. And I mean, her face is like blown half off. Again, there's pages on the site, heroesvillainsandsidekicks.com. Some of them are a little gory, so, you know, view at your own risk. Now, the other men and his superiors are actually pleased that they lost no men, and there was only one passenger who was killed. Of course, this little girl. But Starr felt differently. Now, one of the men watches him cradle the girl, and Starr looks up and says, "This is not how the world should be." Now, one of the men on his crew takes notice of this. He believes Starr to be a man of conviction, and then later invites Starr to join him and become a member of the secret organization that strives to better the world in a fairly warped way, but it strives to better the world. Now, this organization is of course called the Grail. Now, Starr is interested, and he decides to see what they're all about, and he meets with Einstein, one of the Grail's higher-ups, and Einstein lays out their plans. Now, they're a little wacky. The Grail believes that the end of the world is coming. You know, society is falling apart. We're all sinners. And, you know, it's then that they decide the world is not worth saving. Now, the Grail, however, was, you know, they weren't going to wait for it to just end. They were going to sort of put their finger on the scales and help the end of the world along a little bit by detonating a nuclear bomb over Baghdad, facilitating and stoking war between countries, bringing the world to the edge of Armageddon. Now, in this plan, like it's a very complex plan. It goes over 2-3 pages, but you know they do that. Then Russia is obliterated by nuclear weapons. Then, you know, nuclear weapons are flying all over the place. And then at that point, all the nuclear weapons, all the silos in the world launch, and they're in the air, but they fail to detonate. Now, why? This is where it gets interesting. Because Christ, the Son of God, returns and saves mankind. Now, how does the Grail know this? How can they count on the big man himself? Well, apparently he lives in the Grail's house. Now, according to the Grail, Christ did not die on the cross, but was actually drugged by the Grail to, you know, as a semblance of death. He was then taken down and spirited away to live out his life under the protection of the Grail. So we're already starting to see maybe if the other shows didn't, episodes didn't let you know why women's groups, Christian groups didn't like this. This one takes the cake, right? Now, the Grail, now to make sure that the quote unquote power of Christ didn't get diluted from the actual Christ person, to keep the bloodline pure, he was bred in his own bloodline. So they kept, you know, interbreeding, and we're going to talk about that more on that in a minute. Now, again, Starr was interested, and he was given his first mission by Einstein, and if he performed well, he was in. So his mission was to silence a Grail defector who, when his story was told, was probably thrown into an insane asylum. But there were a couple of reporters that were starting to listen to his ramblings and sort of taking him serious. So Starr's mission was to silence the defector without raising any suspicions. Now, he accepted, and he came up with a solution that the Grail was not really prepared for. What he did was he blew up the entire asylum, killing everyone in it. Now, when Einstein there from the Grail voiced his concern and surprise, Starr simply said, "How many children died at Sodom and Gomorrah?" And with that, he was in. Einstein was like, "You're in." All right, now a word from our sponsor. For you, the listeners of the Heroes, Villains, and Sidekicks show, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. Now, my son just saw this movie the other night and said it was fantastic. So it reminded me that, of course, it was a book, right? So in this episode, I'm actually recommending, I downloaded it because I wanted to listen to it again, the book It. So you can download it for your free book. And of course, it's narrated by Stephen King. Or no, it's written by Stephen King. Narrated by Steven Weber, who does a fantastic job. It is unabridged. It's 44 hours and 57 minutes. So head over there and get your free audiobook today. You just have to go to audibletrial.com/heroes, villains, and sidekicks. Again, to get your free audiobook, head over to audibletrial.com/heroes, villains, and sidekicks. All right, now back to the show. Now, Starr rose through the ranks, and when he was deemed ready, he was granted an audience with the Grail's savior, the descendant of Jesus Christ. Now, remember, the descendants of Christ were bred within their own bloodline for, I guess, what, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Now, he got to meet the descendants of Christ in 1980. Now, suffice it to say, when Starr meets them, they are, deformed-ish, feces-throwing imbeciles, as he calls them. Now, the couple are naked, and they're living inside this sort of hut that's, in a cage, so they're caged, pretty much like a zoo. And Starr cannot believe what he is seeing, and Brendel, this is the guy who recruited him, he's there with him, and he's telling Brendel, I just can't believe this is happening. How can you think that these things are going to be the saviors of the world when you do this? And he, of course, just has faith. And with that, the man throws feces at them, just covering them in crap. So it's pretty gross. Now, and here's the thing. This is where you realize that the Grail truly believes that these, imbeciles are filled with the power of God, and that the child that they're going to have will be the new Messiah. Because it just happens that this is going to be a child when they're going to start their plan, so their child is going to be the actual Messiah. They believe that. They believe that it's just going to happen. And when the time is right and all the nuclear weapons are launched and the world really is about to end, that this inbred Christ child will manifest his powers and save the world. I mean, they're banking literally on launching every nuclear every nuclear weapon in the world, and they just have faith that this kid will all of a sudden start glowing or something, manifest the powers of Christ, and save the world. So they're insane, basically. But they believe it. And, what are you going to do? I'm sure they're going to be safed away somewhere, but I don't know. You really get a sense that they believe this. They believe this. They have an unwavering faith in their righteous mission. And as we all know, when you think you are right and that you have your God on your side, you believe you can pretty much do anything. And the Grail does. The Grail believes they can do this and they will be saved. The world will be saved. Now, of course, they also, if you think about it too, the world will be saved under a Christ that they think they control. So, that is a little scary. Now, that was 1980. Now, in 1982, Herr Starr has risen even higher in the Grail, even higher in the organization, and he is honored with a meeting who Starr describes himself as the most powerful man in the world. Allfather, leader of the Grail. Now, Allfather is huge. I mean, think of, the Blob from X-Men books, and Kingpin had a baby. I mean, he's gigantic, and he's always shown sort of like his eyes are half closed, and he's always eating. You can hear him kind of talk like this, like the guy from Monty Python, like, I can't eat another bite, just a thin wafer. But think of that. And he's always just grossly shoving food into his mouth. It's just like it's everywhere. And then he just sort of vomits, just projectile vomits the food out. It's pretty gross. Again, head over to the site, heroesvillainsandsidekicks.com, and I'll put some pages up for that. Now, Allfather informs Starr that he is being promoted to Sacred Executioner and will have a seat on the Grail Council and will sit at the right hand of the Allfather. But Allfather tells him it's not because of his spotless record. It's actually something else. Allfather then says because he has steel. He knows he has steel. And then Allfather, says quietly, because of a star for a star. Now, when Herr Starr hears this, he shows genuine shock, and it's really the first time we have seen Starr really show any emotion in this entire comic, Preacher's One Man War. And it's really interesting. So we know something important here is going to happen. Now, it's then that Allfather tells him a story, recounts a story. And he recounts the story of a little boy who was neglected by his family, who was quiet and kept to himself, thinking it would, people would leave him alone. But then one day, a gang of bullies corners him in an alley and holds him down. And their leader takes a piece of glass and says, "A star for a star," and proceeds to make 5 cuts into his face, crossing Star's eye. So that's how it looks like a star. And this is what, the Allfather says to him. Now, I'm going to just keep going as Allfather telling the story. Now, the boy screams so hard that his voice becomes ugly and grated from that day on. The boy's eye is damaged beyond repair and is removed. This happened when the boy was 5, but the Allfather doesn't end there. He continues the tale, saying that the deaths of the children start sometime after and are staggered about a year apart. One drowned in a river, one was crushed under a car, 2 brothers were burned to death when their house caught fire, and the leader of the group was found dead, having drunk weed killer. His spine bent backwards so his head touched his heels. The last one, the leader, died when the boy was 11. Allfather says patience, resolve, steel, and skill. Now, with that, he excuses Starr, who has bowed his head and is gritting his teeth. Again, we've never seen Starr with this kind of emotion. He is furious. And he just says, "Thank you, Allfather." So then we see Starr, and he's in the bathroom, and he is kneeling at the toilet. He might have been vomiting. Now he raises his head with tears in his eyes and says, "Patience, resolve, skill, and hate, Allfather." Now, this is so cool because we learn, why Starr has this scar. We learn, what kind of man he is and how he developed into that. I mean, as a boy, to just systematically sort of plan the death of these other children. I mean, it's very cool. And then up until then, I always picture hearing Starr as having a, this suave sort of German voice. But here we learn that it's just coarse and grating. And it's very neat. I love that kind of detail. I mean, I just to sort of be able to hear his voice coming from the comic now. And I haven't seen the show, so I'm really curious to see what his voice is like on the show. And again, he's crying when he's saying this, and hate Allfather. And again, it's really the only time you see emotion coming from him in this whole book. Now, time passes, and in 1984, the descendants of Christ have their child, and he looks like some kind of alien, weird-looking, bug-eyed kid, man. And like I said, there's going to be images over the site, so head over there, heroesvillainsandsidekicks.com. And he looks bizarre. Now, in 1990, Starr he's ready to reveal his plan to Brendel. Now, this is the man who, brought him onto the team, brought him into the Grail. And Starr tells him, he sees that the Grail actually has a great plan to bring order to the world, because that's all he wants is order, Starr. Now, but, to put the plan in the hands of, as he calls it, that monkey child, and faith would just be a waste. Now, Brendel is horrified. As far as he's concerned, Starr is blaspheming the Son of God. He believes that this, inbred monkey boy kid is the Son of God. He believes he is Christ incarnate, pretty much. And he is horrified. And the art on that page is great. His face, he's in tears. Now, Starr reveals his plan is to allow all the Grail's plans to continue, but to find another Messiah, his own Messiah, one that is not an idiot, and that, of course, since he doesn't need the quote-unquote Son of Christ idiot child, he plans on killing him. So, and Brendel asks if Starr has forgotten that that little girl, the little girl that he cradled and said it doesn't have to be like this. And what he didn't understand was he didn't care about the girl. He didn't care about the dead girl. He cared that it didn't have to be like this, that it needed to be orderly. That was the important thing. The world needed to be orderly, not that this little girl dies. And when Brendel asks if he remembers her, he just says, I would kill 1,000,000 little girls. I'm at war. And he's at war with chaos. And of course, he then goes ahead and he has to kill Brendel. But he needed to tell him that. And I found that interesting that, Starr really has no physical or emotional attachments with anyone, but he told him that story and he killed him quickly, which I thought that was interesting because he never really had to tell him that. He could have just got him killed. We then jump to 1994, and Starr is biding his time. He's still disgusted with the monkey boy the Grail believes is the Messiah. The boy is now in his teens and is just a complete inbred imbecile. And I'm using the words that he's using. And he looks hilarious. So check out the site to see it. It's like got this one unibrow thing going on. It's hilarious. So Starr is given... Now, but he doesn't want him. He doesn't think he can do this. He obviously doesn't believe. He has no faith. Now, Starr is given the answers to all his problems when an actual angel is captured by the Grail. Have some coffee there. And, yep, this is the father of Genesis, which we've talked about in other episodes. Now, Starr tortures him and learns all about Genesis. And most importantly, he learns about Jesse Custer, the man with the power and the voice of God. And Starr knows he has found his Messiah and his plans can move forward. So it's really interesting to know, like, now we find out how Starr even found out about Jesse, how he knew that this other person can be used as a Messiah. So let's jump into the Preacher series. Like I said, we've covered a lot of Starr's adventures in other episodes, so just go back and listen to those in the Preacher series that we just did. So, again, subscribe on iTunes and grab those. Oh, and when you're subscribing, leave a quick review if you get a chance. I'd really appreciate it. Or you can, leave some comments here in this YouTube video. But if you could go to iTunes and leave a review, they really help us move up the rankings and really help other people find out about us. So if you get a chance, head over there and leave a review and subscribe. So let's go ahead and talk about some of this abuse I talked about and bad luck that Starr has. Now, he is a rigid man who follows his plan very well. But, all plans tend to start going off the rails sometimes when there's this many moving parts. And, he didn't really know what he was getting into when he was trying to use Jesse and catch Jesse as the Messiah. So, or the fact it'd be a vampire in the mix, just all these crazy things. The Saint of Killers, everything. So let's talk about, and I've got these in bullet points here, so I remember them. The things that happen to Starr, the bad things that happen to Starr as he's on his mission to get Jesse. Now, number one, and I don't think these aren't in order, but one, he is raped by a male prostitute, which introduces a new kink in his sexual appetites when he's with prostitutes. He's with a lot of prostitutes and usually does very degrading things to them and with them. He's strange. He's got some strange sexual picadillos, let's put it that way. And pretty much from that point on, he needs the prostitutes to be servicing him with a sex toy. So they're wearing a strap-on. So, and you'll see that in the comic. Let's see. Number two, he has his penis and testicles bitten off by a very large dog. So at one point, he loses everything. Number three, he is held captive by 3 brothers in the desert in a cave who cut off his leg and eat it. So let's just up to 3 at this point. Let's see. He's lost his penis, his testicles, and half of one leg. At one point, Tulip shoots half his ear off in a gun battle. That's 4. 5, Jesse cuts an X into Starr's bald head, which is funny because this pretty much makes him look like a big penis because he's got this X carved in the top of his head. And he's so embarrassed about that he tries on hats. And I've got this hilarious page over on the site where he's trying on all these weird different hats. And of course, number 6, at the end of the comic, he meets his end when Tulip blows the back of his head clean off. So these are all things, plus other things, beatings he's taken. But those are some of the biggies that happens to Starr. Now, it's hilarious. It's during all of this that Starr's plans start to go off the rail. Even though he kills Allfather and the monkey idiot and wrests control of the Grail, really what happens is, due to all these sort of humiliations he's suffered at the hands of Jesse and going after Jesse, his plan really just starts to devolve into pure revenge. Because most of the Grail isn't with him. Most of the Grail gets killed through all sorts of different battles with Jesse and the Saint of Killers. So he's really left almost alone at the end with just a few people. And that's why I want to talk about a couple of those people. Now, again, through all this, he really has like 2 main people left that totally believe in him. And that is Featherstone and Hoover. And they also help him hunting Jesse and stuff. Now, a little on Featherstone and Hoover. Featherstone is a small, petite woman who, for whatever reason, is deeply in love with Starr. And, of course, the feelings are not reciprocal at all. At one point, he even says to her, you are nothing and I could never feel anything for you. And in the end, she actually turns on him, and Starr shoots her and kills her. And so, boom, she's gone. But it's Hoover that has the most interesting story in the comic for me. I don't know. It's so small, but whenever I think of Preacher, one of the first things I think of is Hoover. And I love the story. It's like I said, it's one of my favorite side stories. Now, early on, Hoover comes face to face with Jesse, and he pulls his gun. Now, Hoover isn't a bad guy, and you can tell early on he's really only there because he loves Featherstone, who of course does not love him. Well, Jesse is new to his powers and angry, and he looks at Hoover and he uses the voice and tells him to count every grain of sand on the beach. So they're fighting on a beach. So he says, count every grain of sand on this beach. And Hoover at that point is mesmerized, drops to his knees, and gets to work while Jesse and the gang escape the Grail once again. Now, we don't see Hoover at this point until much, much later in the series, probably with maybe only, I think it's like maybe only 5 or 6 issues left. So years and years and years, we see him, and he's haggard. He's drawn, and he's huddled over small piles of sand with like this stone wall shielding it from the wind. And he drops something down, and he just exclaims, 2,999,999. Oh my God. And he starts dancing around, and he realizes he's done it all. He's counted every grain of sand, and he's free. It's so, think of it. You are compelled morning, noon, and night to count every grain of sand on, it's a smaller beach, obviously, but I was just thinking it would just be horrible. But, he then makes his way back to Featherstone and the Grail, and they take him back, but he is damaged and he is broken. He is drawn. He is gaunt. His eyes are just, but he still loves Featherstone. And, it's just heartbreaking. It's sad. Now, then, of course, at one point, he does come face to face again with Jesse, and he plans to shoot him for, the agony that he's endured. And at that point, Jesse just mans up and says how sorry he was for what he did. And he's just sorry. He could tell he's not a bad guy, and he apologizes. Well, Hoover, being a great guy, or a good guy at least, he breaks down, and he tells him he just can't take it. He's, he has a mental breakdown times 5. And Jesse actually just, he takes him and he uses the voice and he tells him to forget. And Hoover then falls asleep on a park bench. And when he wakes up, he's happy and he is carefree. I mean, he is forgotten. Unfortunately, he goes back to the Grail, and because he loves Featherstone. And unfortunately, when he does that, he is killed during the whole battle at the Alamo. Starr ends up shooting him. When Hoover sees that he's killed Featherstone, he tries to shoot Starr. Starr kills him. He's dead. He's one of the characters, Grail side, the only character Grail side, but one of the characters in the book I really wished he'd made it. I just, because he had such a horrible life that I really wish he made it, but he didn't. And of course, in the end, Starr himself, with a gun battle with Tulip, is killed, back of the head totally blown off. So it was interesting that we always thought that it would be between Jesse and Starr, but in the end, it's Tulip who kills him. And of course, the world doesn't blow up, and everything is fine. Now, again, Starr is one of my favorite characters because he is the other side of Jesse. He's the flipped coin of Jesse. And I just always was, I'm always interested in him. I love his look. And then seeing his backstory from Preacher's one-man war was just fantastic. Again, if you're picking up some of these issues, some of them are fairly pricey, but you can get a lot of these, even these specials, in trades. And I'll have some links over at the site so you can take a look at that, and over on the YouTube page. So again, this was Starr. This was a lot of fun. This whole series on Preacher was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. Again, it's one of my favorites. I was a huge Vertigo fan. Still am, even though now more Young Animals than Vertigo right now. But this was a big one for me. And, you know, it was up there with Sandman and Hellblazer and all these other really amazing Vertigo books at that time. I don't know what I want to do for the next series. I am torn. Maybe I'll do like a whole Vertigo series here and there. I'll pick some Vertigo book and do a series on. One of the things I'd love to do a series on, and I think I will, I think I'll start writing them, is Books of Magic. I love Books of Magic. Huge Tim Hunter fan. So there we go. The next Vertigo series I'm going to do is going to be on Books of Magic. So I don't know when they're going to start, but I'll start writing them because that has got a huge run in some amazing titles. Now, again, I'm trying to think what other series, if you have any ideas of a different series or a different character you'd like to hear about, you can head over to a couple different places. The site, heroesvillainsandsidekicks.com. Leave it in the comments for this post. And or you can go to the YouTube page and leave a comment there. Or you can go to our Facebook group. Just search for Heroes, Villains, and Sidekicks, and you can go ahead to our Facebook page and leave a comment or a idea for a show there. That's where I get some of these. But we're all over the place, so just go ahead and take a look. So again, we'll be back on schedule now. Every Monday, new episode. This Monday, of course, will be this show. I'll be putting it up. And then next Monday, look for a episode on The Punisher. And the cool thing about that, that's going to be an interview show. I've got an interview with someone who is integral to the creation of the character. And it's an awesome interview. So not this Monday, but next Monday will be The Punisher. Well, I want to thank you guys for listening. This has been a great episode, a fun episode for me. I'm a huge Preacher fan. I hope you enjoyed it. We will be back next week with more. Until then, take care. Well, all right. I want to thank you guys also on the YouTube side for watching this. And this has been fun. I haven't done one of these live feeds before. And what I do for these is I actually write up a script, because I don't want to forget anything. And then I use that script over on the website for the, it's not really show notes at that point because it's almost like a blog post or a blog article. So you can go over there and you can see a bunch of photos. Again, this will be up on Monday. So if you want to see some of the pages I've been talking about, we've got a lot of, this is our 46th podcast, 47th podcast. And I've got probably about another 10 written that I'll be sort of recording now that I'm back on track. Again, I want to thank you for watching. If this is something you'd like me to do again, if you're, leave a comment. If it's sort of just boring because I'm talking into the microphone, then let me know, because then I'll maybe try to switch something up when I'm doing these recordings. Okay, I want to thank you guys a lot. Thanks for watching.